Good evening. We are live at the African Union offices in Nairobi, Kenya, and we are also live on NTV Kenya and NTV Uganda. My name is Zaina Bondat, and welcome to this live forum talking about the El Nino and the impact or the projected impact on the livestock industry specifically. You know, a lot of times when we talk about food security, the focus is always on crop production. Rarely do we talk about the impact on the livestock subsector, the livestock that were lost, the impact of those losses and damage, and how these farmers are being prepared for this oncoming El Nino. So we are just about to go into the short rain season, the OND season as the forecasters call it, October, November, December season with the whole Horn of Africa. And already forecasters are projecting an El Nino, not just in the Horn of Africa region, but around the world. An El Nino has been projected, and it is said to be as bad as the El Nino that the region experienced in 1997. So what does this mean for the farmers in East Africa? That is what we are here to discuss today. My name is Zaina Bondati, and once again, welcome to this discussion. You can join us live. You can also join us on social media. Tweet me at Zaina Bondati. We'll be happy to hear from you. What were your experiences in 1997 during that El Nino, especially if you're a farmer? Where were you? What were the losses you incurred? And how do you expect to be helped? Or how are you preparing yourself for this oncoming El Nino, which is projected to hit us in between 2 and 3 weeks? So I'd like to introduce my panel right now. Right next to me is Lois Oldukunyi, who is Oldukunyi, I'm sorry. Lois Oldukunyi, who is a farmer from Kajiado County. She has joined us all the way from Isinya in Kajiado County, and she's also a member of our dairy farmers cooperative, a board member of a dairy farmers cooperative, and she'll be telling us a little bit about how they, as farmers, what they know about the El Nino and how they are preparing themselves. And next to him, we have George Masharia, who is a banker from Equity Bank, and he specializes in food and agriculture banking at Equity Bank, and he'll tell us how the financial services sector, what role they play in this El Nino conversation, what role they played in 1997. And next to him, we have Paul Opio, who's also a livestock and pastoralism expert with the Food and Agriculture Organization. He's the regional advisor for FAO Africa. And then next to him, we have a government official, Dr. Christopher Wanga, representing the government of Kenya in this conversation. Dr. Christopher is the director of livestock policy research and regulation, the Ministry of Agriculture, the State Department of Livestock Development specifically. And then last but not least, we have David Maina, who is our host here at the AU today. David Maina is feed and livestock expert. And he has some feelings about why livestock farmers are not involved in this El Nino conversation. So I'd like to start off with the farmer right next to me. Lois, yes. Welcome to this conversation.
Thank you.
As a farmer yourself, a livestock farmer particularly, do you know what an El Nino is?
Yes, I do.
What is it? I
know, can remember very well 1997. We experienced the first El Nino in our lifetime, and there was a lot of rains and a lot of floods, and we lost many sheep and goat, but the cows were not affected.
They are bigger, so they can withstand the flooding.
The sheep and goat were affected with Rift Valley fever. To me, El Nino is not a danger to our livestock community if we are taking precaution, because when we experience good rains, the little or the few cows which were left, they will multiply. And we are welcoming the next El Nino. But our worry is we have no livestock now because all our cattle were lost during the last drought. So I'm appealing to government to look at it, how they will prepare us. Yes. Because if we get the rains and we have a lot of pastures, and we don't have cattle, the El Nino will mean nothing to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to bring in here Mr. Opio to tell us from an expert point of view, what is an El Nino?
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, listeners. El Nino
Please hold your microphone closer to your mouth. Yes.
El Nino, as climate scientists say it. I'm a livestock person.
Oh, I'm sorry. There seems to be a problem with your microphone. Maybe I could I could skip you for a moment as we figure out your.
Hello?
Great.
Is that
Now that's
better? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. El Nino, as climate scientists say, is a warming of the surface temperature of the sea, particularly the Pacific. But that warming of the sea surface temperature has got implication on global weather patterns. Now, in Eastern Africa, like the situation that we are about to experience, it comes with different impacts. In some areas, we would have enhanced rains, but in certain parts of Eastern Africa, we may have even depressed rains. So our national meteorological organizations, they know the impacts in different areas by countries.
Yes.
So in simplest term, El Nino brings in a lot of rains, as Lois has mentioned. So for livestock keepers, it's good news. We are just coming out of a drought. So to hear a lot of rains coming for pastoralists, I think is really good news for the region.
Mr. Pio, Lois has talked about the impact to her as a Kenyan farmer. You're from Uganda yourself, right? What was the impact of the 97 El Nino in Uganda?
The impact will vary across different livelihoods in Uganda. For mainly crop farmers, particularly people living in flood-prone areas, the impact were very devastating. In the sense that a lot of crops were washed away.
Your microphone again has disappeared. I see Mr. Washari is trying to help you there with his microphone. Yes, just somebody will come and pick it up. Don't you
Is
worry.
it better?
Yes, now that's better.
So I was at the point of explaining the impacts have been varied in Uganda across the different livelihood zones. The impact were really more intense, particularly for people who are living in flood-prone areas. They were able to, most people lost their crops, and a lot of crop byproducts also go into livestock feeds. And in the end, you find also the livestock sector were affected. Areas like Karamoja, flash floods, a lot of livestock were washed away actually because of enhanced rains. Flood areas like Teso sub-region, which absorbs a lot of the upstream water from the Karamoja mountains. Farmer fields were all flooded, pastures, areas where people go for grazing. These areas were all flooded. So access to feed for livestock were also a problem at the time. So El Nino, as I mentioned, brings in a lot of different impacts to different farmers.
David, if I could just bring you into this conversation, where were you in 1997?
I was sitting there.
Form 4 exams. I think it began when we were just beginning, and the rain stayed with us until we finished, then continued into the December holiday.
Did you have any...
So must have been almost getting an ID by then.
Almost getting an ID?
Yes.
Did you have any livestock you lost in the process?
No. I think for the highlands, it was a bumper harvest for the T-zone where I come from. There wasn't a lot of threat for any floods apart from erosions, rivers getting out of the limits, and a lot of alert on drowning and kids playing around the rivers. So, but most of it, in the end, people are looking back with a lot of excitement about the short-term crops like the potatoes, the tomatoes, and of course the tea, which benefited a lot from the water. So I think for where I come from, it was exciting, and perhaps even today, and for them would be any focus on El Nino would be a great news on the positive side.
You're from the Central Highlands of Kenya.
Central, yes.
One of the impacts that it said that the Central Highlands were some of the worst affected in Kenya, and there are parts of those areas that, by the way, today you can't grow nduma anymore.
It's because of the landslides,
right?
The landslides?
Yes, as a result of the massive soil erosion that occurred because of the loss of the livestock. Myself, I think I was in class 4 at the time in 1997. So, Dr. Wanga, you had Loisia's appeal to the government to prepare them as farmers. So let's talk about awareness. Do you think you, as the State Department of Livestock, have told farmers like Lois here how to prepare for this El Nino, or how are you preparing these farmers?
Thank you very much, Zainab. To be very, very important for all of us, especially the Kenyan farmers, whether crop or livestock, to be aware that El Nino has its massive advantages, and yet you can also incur losses. While public information may not be sufficient, but I want to believe such a program is extremely critical in bringing to the fore the measures we may take as a country, as members of the public, to protect our crops, to protect our livestock, to protect our fish from the effects of El Nino. The most important that our farmers need to appreciate, the way today government is structured, the issues agriculture, livestock and crops are played at two levels of government: the county government and the national government. The national government will be very strong on policy, regulation, and disasters. And it's always not good to plan for disaster. Although we have contingency measures to address specific scenarios, whether it's floods or any other occurrences, but it will be extremely important for all farmers to take precaution, especially those who live in lowlands, because it will be very sad that after such a severe drought that has ravaged our livestock, and then we lose even a single sheep or single goat to floods. So since the flood-prone areas we know as the farming communities, it is extremely critical that our livestock resources, especially, like Lois said, the short ones, sheep, goats, chicken, are kept away from the flood-prone areas so that we avoid scenarios whereby our animals are going to be swept away courtesy of floods. But the flip side again is to encourage farmers to look at the advantages, and as part of mitigation, harvesting of the pasture that is going to be a byproduct of this severe of the heavy rains becomes a real advantage to us. And therefore, as we mitigate the threats of El Nino, we must think about having sufficient stores of the pasture that may arise. However, for the large-scale farmers who probably are just getting out of harvest period, and they may not have had time sufficient to build their silos and stores, again, speed is of essence so that they're able to pick as much that is left out, because again, continuous flooding on huge farms becomes a risk. So yes, education will never be sufficient, but we must keep reminding of our farmers of the contingency measures that we keep on taking. And this is at the level of policy, at the level of operations, at the level of extension services, right down on our farms.
Lois was listening to you very keenly, very keenly as you were speaking. I think she has some follow-up questions for you, but we'll get back to your questions, Lois. I'd like to bring in Mr. Masharia here. From the banking perspective, how are you preparing for this impending El Ninos?
Thank you very much, Zainab. And just to probably mention something about 1997 before I even come to that question briefly. In 1997, I grew up in rural Kenya, and one of the key memory that I always have is how vehicles that would transport milk from farmer milk collection centers could not actually be able to access the collection centers. And what that meant was that farmers had either to trek for kilometers to deliver the milk to where the nearby tarmac road was. Alternatively, they pour the milk, and that's something that has always been memorable in me. Now, coming back to your question, in banks, I think one of the key highlight is that we have to prepare farmers, and particularly those who are actually using fodder from their own farms, that may be requiring some stocking or additional production of forage fodder. Now, one of the key highlights in the recent years that we have seen as financial institutions is instances where farmers would actually be caught unawares, not only by heavy rains and flooding, but also by issues to do with the prolonged dry spell. And so what the lessons we have learned over time is how can we be able to empower the farmers to be able, one, to know that there is need to stock up feeds for the future days, but also importantly to assure them that, because most of the times you realize that the farmer relies on income on a monthly basis if they are selling milk to be able to continue buying fodder. So where they are not able to do that, then as financial institutions, we come in and shield them by giving them credit that can be able to allow them to stock up in preparation for such kind of instances. Most importantly, also supporting them on ensuring that they can be able to grow more, especially the short-term fodder crops that can actually run during that period of long rains or floods.
Okay.
Thank you.
David, you talk so much about fodder, given that that's your area of specialization, and you are encouraging, you're putting out a call for livestock farmers across the region to stock up on this fodder and this feed. Do we even have enough to say we are going to stock up?
Yeah, let me start by saying that we're in a continent that has the highest need that would benefit greatly from a stable livestock sector. Our need for nutrition, in which we are below target. Our need for employment. We have a huge unemployed young population. We have a young population across most of the countries. Kenya and Uganda are actually leading the pack globally in terms of young population, people who need to eat and be healthy and work. Mothers who are in their reproductive age, they need to eat, and therefore the demand in the continent for animal resources is very high and is increasing. FAO is here. They have predicted more than 200% increase in the demand for animal livestock sourced foods by 2050. Now, what do we mean? If we have this potential benefit as a continent, therefore we have the greatest need to have a stable livestock sector. But on the other hand, we don't have it. We have a sector that is very easily manipulated by the weather patterns. When the extreme is good, then we have a good sector. When the weather goes to the other side, when we have drought, we have cows dying, we have people being displaced, we have lives being lost. So basically, we are defined so much as a sector by how the weather looks like. Now, this discussion today must begin to address how do we separate the weather patterns from the stability of our livestock sector? How can we be independent of the weather patterns? And some countries in Africa have managed that. So it's possible also for us. So we have a need to be able to make aware everyone who is listening to us today. And I'm happy that Uganda is listening because the region has suffered greatly from the drought. We only got some rains this year. Imagine how much we lost in the other drought. We have not even recovered. Mama Loisia has said that she lost all her cows.
Yes.
From 270, she was left with 30 animals.
Yes,
She's evidence today that a farmer, a pastoralist, people who are in dairy zones who are dealing with livestock, rearing every day as their livelihood, as the only thing that drives their lives, they lost animals out of drought. We have a period of rain. People are happy. We have forgotten that we have come from such a disaster. And now we have a rain that is coming and is going to convert all the hay and straw that has not been harvested to date into post-harvest loss. Can we afford that as a sector? That's why we are happy to have this meeting, that you can warn farmers, stock now. And that is only in the short term. In the medium term, in the long term, we have to have a conversation on how we delink our sector from the weather patterns.
Lois, you're following very keenly. Have you started stocking up on feed for your animals?
Well,
we don't have
any grass to stock by this time, because the last rain which we received was very minimal. And there are even some other people who have already migrated to to Mombasa because of there are no feeds in their ranches. So when you are talking about El Nino, we are really waiting and very eagerly praying to God, let the El Nino come, so we can have enough grass for the little cattle which were left by the drought.
So
and I thank God for this opportunity. I'm appealing to the government, the national government and the county government. And now because we have our banker here, Equity Bank, of which I'm a member of that Equity Bank, we need your help very urgently. Because if the rains come in 1 week or 2 weeks to come, we don't have any animals. Me, I was privileged. God loved me, at least that I had that. There are some bombers which they lost everything. They closed. No sheep, no cows. So to me, to having that, I take myself to be, very privileged by God. There are many families, out of the 90%, 100%, they lost 95% or 98%. So, and now the rains are coming, El Nino are coming. Why are we going to put all this fodder said we don't have cows? So I'm appealing, if God is bringing us rain, is giving us good rain, let the government also come to help us to restock our livestock. Yeah.
So Dr. Wang also mentioned about awareness on the ground, happening on the ground. Have you...
We had it through the meteorological government department, that is El Nino is coming, and we are prepared for it. Because our life, or the way we are brought up, when it is raining, if your cows they are on the other side or the river, they better stay there overnight instead of crossing the river, because this river will sweep all your cows.
Yes.
So we know the danger of crossing the rivers when it is flooded. And in our Kajiado community or Kajiado County, the only danger places is the rivers when they are flooded, and even the bridge when they are broken. But the whole of Maasai land, we are really praying, God, let El Nino come so we can have enough grass. And because we are being taught on how to save the fodder, now the problem is how to fence the paddocks, and also to build up the stores to store our fodders. So we need our government to come to the ground, interior, so they show us how to preserve the fodder and if your water harvesting. Because all this water comes and goes to Mombasa, then we are left with nothing. So I'm really happy for this panel, and I believe something will happen in the pastoralist area. Yes.
Dr. How do you help communities in these pastoral lands that don't even have this grass to begin with? Because David's analysis indicates that the fodder cover is now 60%, you said?
That is now our fodder deficiency.
Yes.
Which means that Dr. Wanga knows the statistics of the animals we have. The region, it's clear that we really are a region that is depending on livestock, the numbers. But in Kenya alone, they are announcing 60% deficiency. They can only feed 4 out of all the cattle they have in the country.
4 out of 10.
So is it a safe place to be? And this call is for who? Is it only for government? Is it for the banks? We really have to look at it in many dimensions to see how do we get ourselves from there. And the situation is not better in other countries. I'm happy that Kenya has done their balance sheet. They can be able to say, yes, we have done it. We see the numbers. We see our problem. But the region and the entire continent is encouraged to have such an analysis, and if possible, be able to review annually to see where do we stand. If you have to continue depending on this sector for wealth creation, for nutrition, for employment, we have to review ourselves every year. Back to Dr. Wanga, I think he has something to say about the fodder deficiency in the country.
Yes, because Dr. Wanga, if you can only feed 4 out of 10 livestock, and you're going into a period where you're telling farmers you need to stock up the feed, and Lois here is saying they don't even have that feed to begin with, how do you help them?
I think this is very important for the viewers to appreciate that the animal feeds balance sheet is not a permanent status. That is work in progress. If you listen to Lois, the moment we'll have rains for a prolonged period of 3 months, the amount of fodder will increase dramatically. So we as government and our stakeholders, animal owners, we must close ranks. And this is probably where I'll also want to call upon our extension officers, especially where they exist, to take this up. The challenge Lois has given us. We must be able to train the animal owners on how to harvest water, how to store fodder, how to prepare silage where it's possible, so that we can keep this fodder for as long and be able to improve on our animal feeds balance sheet. Because this is a very critical input in livestock production. Like if you look at where the government is focusing on, you have heard Kenya is 80% arid or semi-arid. Only 20% is properly supplied with rain. And therefore, we have very serious interventions aimed at making sure this 80%, which is arid and semi-arid, like Kajiado, where she comes from, is useful. And the usefulness is based on major factors of planning. And within the livestock space, I wish to inform Kenyans that we are working on a very robust livestock master plan, county-specific, regional-specific, and integrating with our neighborhood and all the resource lines, looking through all the value chains within the livestock space. What are the needs of cattle? What are the needs of donkeys? What are the needs of camels? What are the needs of sheep and goats? And what are the populations in the respective counties? And therefore, the balance sheet that we have, the one that we'll be updating every year, is it able to be sufficient? And that is the area that we will be able to close ranks and make sure that Lois and other farmers will never lose animals again, where we'll be able to look at the balance sheet and come to your farm and convince you, please, the drought is going to be 9 months, you lose these animals. And in terms of project interventions, viewers, I want to mention that there's a very critical program called DRIVE, Risking Livestock. And this drive aims at enhancing resilience within the arid and semi-arid communities. And investment in pasture is one critical area of interest. And therefore, I want to invite all of us who are investing within the livestock sector that equity is there, the Kenya Development Corporation is there, the Kenya Commercial Bank is there, Cooperative Bank is there. Kindly, there's a huge opportunity in bulking and doing hay preservation. I will tell you, when we are trying to do interventions in areas like Wajir, Garissa, Mandera during the drought period, it was very interesting. We could not get any hay all along. You do almost 400-500 kilometers to access hay. So I was imagining if an entrepreneur within the Garissa space, the Tana Delta, where you can find a bit of fodder even during drought, had invested in bulking hay, that would be a multimillionaire. So the opportunities come with this, and that's why I want to invite our investors in the livestock space that the biggest opportunity you have is making sure the farmers can access as much hay and fodder as they can. And the secret is simple. Harvest when it's plenty and store. And now sell at your own pleasure. So the investment is in storage and preservation.
Great. We have to take a quick commercial break now, but when we come back, we'll allow Lois to ask you questions. She looks like she really wants to ask you some questions, so we'll allow her to ask the government official here questions. Remember, we're live on NTV Kenya and NTV Uganda, and this conversation still continues on social media. You can find me at Zain Wandati, Z-E-Y-N Wandati. Give us your comments, your thoughts, your questions, and we'll put them to the panel. We'll be right back after this break. just joining us, we are having a discussion about the impact of the El Nino on the livestock subsector, particularly across the Eastern Africa region. And we're having this conversation at the African Union offices in Nairobi. We've got a farmer on the panel, we've got a government representative on the panel, and we've got a few experts as well as a financial expert. And this conversation is live on NTV Kenya as well as NTV Uganda. And you can join us on social media at Zain Wandati, that's Z-E-Y-N Wandati. Share your thoughts, your comments. Where were you in 1997 during the El Nino then? What losses and damage did you suffer then? And how have you prepared yourself for this oncoming El Nino rains? So before we went on break, we were talking about preparedness on the ground. And I'd just like to draw your attention to a report that the UN published yesterday, the UN OCHA office. It's the Eastern Africa El Nino Forecast and Humanitarian Impact. And the report says that one of the impacts that the Eastern Africa region will suffer, that being Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Somalia, Tanzania, there's of course the flooding, diseases, this is human diseases, landslides also, and Rift Valley fever. Now, Rift Valley fever was also a concern during, and Lois is nodding very. Rift Valley fever was also a concern during the 1997 El Nino, when nearly 1,000 heads of livestock died in Kenya due to Rift Valley fever. But we have the EAC region. It is technically one land, so animals can move from one region to the other. How do you protect these animals when, you know, Lois is on the border, Isinya is on the border with Tanzania, so that when she's moving her animals to Tanzania, she's not exposed to RVF, and also the animals coming to this other side are also protected from RVF. Opio.
Okay, thank you. The issue of cross-border movements or movement of pastoralists is something that is very difficult to control, but in terms of managing and protecting the health of that livestock, it's something we can work on. Now, there are a number of initiatives that are ongoing with the Africa Union, with IGAD, Center for Pastoral Areas and Livestock Development, in coordination with the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock Department of the different countries in the region. With FAO from 2019, the first memorandum of understanding was signed between the line ministries to coordinate and harmonize their action on control of transboundary diseases. This was with a clear recognition that pastoralists are moving. And this moving population, we need to make sure that when they are moving, the information about the health of those livestock is known by receiving countries. So the countries are coordinating, they are sharing information, they have a platform, they meet regularly. So this is happening. It is working. But there are always, of course, difficulties in accessing some of these areas where pastoralists are. Sometimes, like now we are talking about El Nino, you will find roads, access to pastoralist communities to deliver those services becomes a problem itself. But the Ministry of Livestock in different countries have gotten ways to navigate around that. And that has always worked. But I want to go back on the issues of numbers in terms of feed resources. I just wanted to weigh in there because FAO and the line ministry in Kenya, in Uganda, Somalia as well, and Sudan, we have been working very, very strongly in trying to inventorize feed resources that we have in the region. And I can tell viewers very categorically, to reinforce what Dr. mentioned here, that we have feed deficit in a number of countries. Kenya actually has a negative feed balance, meaning you have more livestock than the feed that you have. So the message that the ministry is passing in terms of El Nino is coming, harvest, keep the feed that you have. If that is not done at the backdrop of a country with already less feed resources, you can see the impact that it will have.
Does Uganda also have a feed deficit?
Uganda, fortunately, is the only country with a positive feed balance. Yeah? But that said, it doesn't mean Kenya has a lot of potential to enhance its feed resources. Okay? And what am I saying? There's still a lot of post-harvest losses, which Dr. was talking about here, which if we minimize that, and those losses are converted into usable feed for livestock, I think that would go a long way in addressing feed gaps. Just to give figures, Kenya produces 46 million metric tons of feed annually. That's the feed balance, total feed balance for Kenya. But Kenya requires 55 million metric tons to feed its entire livestock population.
So we are still in a deficit.
So you're in a deficit. That's why it explains also mobility. People have to move to access some of this additional feed across borders. Okay? But the potential is there. Now, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia, they also have negative feed balances. But potentials are there. As a region, I think if we work together, using the data that we have, enhancing and leveraging on private sector, the banks, and promoting entrepreneurship in the feed sector, I think we will meet that gap.
But do you think we actually have the time to do something between now and when the rains hit us? The focus says maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, these rains will hit us. Do we have the time to actually generate this feed quickly?
We do have the time right now if consistent messaging goes to the communities. Because right now, the situation is we have not yet received that heavy rains. People can still prepare. As Joyce was mentioning, there's still opportunity to move to higher grounds, for example. Okay, there's opportunity to speak peace to other communities where you can access feed when flood comes and sweep away your grazing areas. I still feel there's time for communities to organize themselves and harvest, store quickly, or move to higher grounds and avoid the impacts that floods, water may bring.
You could allow me to weigh in on that because, and I hear you, the aspect of time shortage is actually real. But then that doesn't mean that no interventions can be made. If you look at the last maybe 6 or so months, Kenya, for example, and I acknowledge that most likely it could be the same in Uganda, has enjoyed a relatively good climate or weather, and there is quite a bit of good production. So what that means is that there are some areas today that have enough fodder, grass, hay stored in barns. But there are other areas like Kajiado, as Lois has spoken to, that may not necessarily be having that. But how much time does it require to move hay grass from, say, Eldoret to Kajiado? I mean, it's only 6 hours on the road, right?
If the road is good.
Exactly. So what then that means is that we may want to see how can we be able, as of course the government, private sector like ourselves, how can we be able to support that particular intervention? And at Equity Bank, for example, if I would say, one of the areas that we are really trying to sensitize farmers on is if you don't have that, structure, quickly, do a mabati shelter and we fund you to procure that. Okay, a quick intervention. Go to the livestock feed or other fodder and hay traders, because we have, the good thing is that the livestock sector, and I think Daktari would agree with me, has really evolved over the last couple of years. 10 years ago, you couldn't see anybody selling hay. Today, we have a lot of them. So you just need to make a call. As you are creating a structure for storage, you can be able to get a truck being loaded at the same time. So by the time you are completing, then the hay is already in your farm. So I think that is an area that really farmers need to pick up very easily and very quickly for that matter. But of course, earlier on, I think during the break, Daktari was mentioning that we have pastures that can grow within less than 30-45 days, bracharia grass and all that. So how quickly can our farmers come in and invest in such kind of short-term fodder crops and quickly be able to produce. But I think the 2 weeks or 3 weeks that are there, if you ask me, I would say, or I would encourage farmers, look at the pockets that have excess and move that to your area. But even those who have excess, it could be a regional excess, but not the individual farmer's excess. So if you are an individual farmer within such areas that have excess, then you better procure and have it stored in the farm. And we are happy to come in and support those kind of interventions.
Yes. Yeah. David, somebody here on social media goes by the name Kakana. Kakana says, this conversation is worrying me now, thinking about the El Nino. So should farmers be afraid?
Yeah, and I think I'm happy that that comment is coming up now, because this conversation has a call to action. And the call to action is to farmers, actually. And I think he's a farmer. If you look at, there's a structural difference between Uganda livestock sector and Kenya. And one of the most glaring difference is that you find that the area that is a hub of dairy and large-scale production of livestock on the western side of Uganda has a bit of pastures. So you see large tracts of land with a lot of pastures. And if you look at the marketed fodder, like what you see hay in bales, residues of wheat straw and barley straw, you don't see a lot of hay stores on the roadside selling hay because the structure is different. And I hear Paul saying that they actually have a positive feed balance in Uganda. Mm. It has to do also with the structure of that livestock sector. Kenya relies a lot on Uganda for animal feed. Now, coming to Kenya, you see a lot of areas producing dairy, smallholders, intensive production, and we have also a lot of growing commercial production of both dairy and beef. If you see feedlots are coming, they're emerging. I think the banks are receiving requests to fund feedlots in areas like Kajiado and others. So all these farmers have had very short time to be able to pick the hay that is being built in the farms, because we had a drought, then we got some rains, and the hay grew. And then we have a very short time between when the rain stopped and the sun was shining. Now you say, and of course, according to the forecast, that we have 2 to 3 weeks. Let's just say 2, because they are predicting beginning of October. And this window is closing. When the sun is not shining anymore, we cannot be able to bale or harvest the hay. When it is raining, tractors can't get to the fields. Mm. Now, you can't have baling, and harvesting is a mechanized operation. So it will not be available. So I see that unlike other years, the hay growers have been selling for longer times in other years. But for now, they have a very short period between when it is grown and when it has to be harvested. So how do we ensure that farmers can stock very fast? And I plead with George, because he's here. You represent the banking world. In Kenya and Uganda, you have Equity. Relax the appraisals. When a farmer comes, he's nodding. When a farmer comes and says that I want to get a loan to go and get as much hay as possible and fill my store, relax that appraisal. Don't look at them in the eye of somebody coming to take a loan to start a dry cleaner. Yes. This is actually a survival. Our sector has existential threat because of fodder. So banks must be able to say, let me put aside the other appraisals and look at the fodder, because we have a very short period.
Have been known traditionally to look at farmers as high risk.
Now this is also a call to the banks, and I think George is going to get, he has a right of reply for this, that banks can also be able to look at it with a different eye and see that we have a short time to get all the fodder coming to the farm. Let me tell you how the loss looks like. The loss is that the commercial fodder producers, the rangelands of Narok, of Nakuru, all these areas of Meru, Timau that have been producing fodder. And I say that I want to focus on Kenya because of the high incidences of marketed fodder. If it is not harvested, we are losing millions of tons of fodder that could have been consumed in this sector to help us cushion ourselves against a future disaster. But that one is going to be lost unless it is picked. Now, something else that is very characteristic of Kenya commercial fodder producers, they don't put stores. They expect that when it is ready to harvest, that farmers can come for it. If they don't come for it, they have no storage. You can imagine someone building a store for 200 acres of hay. It's impossible. So it has to be taken by multiple farmers to go and put in their stores. Not just farmers. How about cooperatives? These are aggregated groups. They have farmers around them. The cooperative of Mama Lois, they closed from 16,000 liters of milk a day to 0. Their neighbor is Kajiado, from 60,000 liters a day to 0. Why? Because of fodder. If they have a store near them, they would rather lease a space and just stock. If there are some idle buildings where hay can be put, even if they don't own them, lease the stores and put fodder. Let the county get some emergency funds and buy fodder for the farmers. Because if you don't buy, then the post-harvest loss on the part of production is very high. How about the counties themselves, the cooperatives, the farmer associations? I think we have a very short period and we have to buy as much as we can. Thank you very much.
If in normal circumstances, the pastoral lands often suffer, even in the absence of an El Nino, they often suffer food shortages. And as a country, we still have challenges moving this food because the drought doesn't hit the country the same at the same time. There will always be an area of the country that has more and these pastoral lands that don't have. We still have a problem moving this food from where it is to where it is not. How confident can you be that you can make it happen for livestock farmers?
Are you talking about the logistical challenges?
Yes.
I think right now, and I think as George mentioned, we don't have a major problem. You know, when a truck is picking hay, they actually drive right into the fields and come out. That is what it's about to stop, and that's the biggest fear. And I'm happy that we can make a call to action. Right now, we are having rains in some areas, and then we have a whole day. Right now, it has not rained today. That period when the ground is still dry, that is the time to take that advantage. And I think we also are looking at the side of the livestock producers. Any hay that is not picked now, it is not only a loss to the producer, it's also that we are going to have a missing element of the nutrition of the cattle because they need a high dry matter forage, and that is going to be hay and straw. If that is missing in their diets, we are also losing productivity because they can't eat enough. These are ruminants. They're going to be eating the weeds that are growing during the rains. They're going to be eating napier. Now, we have livestock experts here, I mean the side of business. They can tell you that without that component of a high dry matter fodder, they are underfeeding. Now, can we afford to lose on the side of the production, the milk and the meat? At the same time, we are compounding the post-harvest loss, which is already glaring at 40%. So I think there has to be something to be done in the next 2 weeks. As long as the grounds are dry, the roads are there, let's do what we can do in the next 2 weeks and save the country, save the region from an incoming disaster.
Dr. Wanga, what lessons have we picked from 97 that we will be building on to prepare for this El Nino?
Thank you very much. I think there are two phases to El Nino. We've spoken quite a bit on the fodder. I would want to begin with your initial question. El Nino comes with a lot of vectors reproducing, mosquitoes and other insects, which transmit diseases like Rift Valley fever. And it is critical that we, as both national and county government and the members of the public, beware. Diseases like Rift Valley fever are highly preventable, and yet they can also cause death of both humans and animals. So we expect, as part of preparedness in terms of the county governments and the national governments, that we are now today stockpiling the veterinary supplies, the vaccines, and any other medicines that may be required for quick intervention, so that you don't have time to run to procure. What do we do in terms of Rift Valley protection? This country has a Rift Valley fever contingency plan, very elaborate. The areas to vaccinate, the high-risk areas, with a history built from 1997, the short El Nino of 2007, and other flood-prone areas. So mine is just to encourage and remind our county governments, especially who are responsible for delivery of veterinary services down at the grassroots level, that they hold the key to the control of Rift Valley fever, especially by ensuring that we can vaccinate our animals, so that, and then we'll also do vector control, so the mosquitoes growth in the areas they normally don't occur will be minimized to be able to control the effect of Rift Valley fever.
So this means you have something going on with the Ministry of Health?
Ministry of Health and Ministry of Agriculture. We have a contingency plan where the Ministry of Health know what to do in terms of vector control. The Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock know what to do in terms of vector control. So the issue is stockpiling the vaccines, stockpiling the medical inputs to be able to preempt any scenarios that may be potentially embarrassing in terms of the disease management. Now, in terms of animal feeds and shortages, I want to look at the opportunities. Uganda are our neighbors. The lack of Uganda may not be much of they may not have much investment in the fodder space like Kenya. But the agroecological zone of Uganda is like the 20% of Kenya. So they have pasture growing all around. This ASAL business is our business, Somali, Southern Sudan. So this is something that the Ugandans by nature may be a bit luckier. So the Kenyans, the Somalia, and the people actually in the Horn of Africa have drought as perpetual challenge, have the floods as a perpetual challenge. So I think the call on us in terms of making sure we can address our shortage on animal feeds is basically harvesting and investing in storage. You had it all. If you can't store, then we will not be able to get to even out supplies when we have shortages and when we have plenty. And also there is the issue of stocking rate. Stocking rate, viewers, is keeping animals that are sufficient for the kind of acreage of land you have and for the amount of fodder you store. So if you are able to store a lot of fodder, you can keep n number of animals. And this is where I want to call upon all the livestock farmers to benefit from extension officers who will be able to specifically help you to know your stocking rate so that however much you have shortages, you do not get the losses like the ones we encountered.
Okay, so we need to take another quick commercial break so we can tell you what to expect in the news headlines coming up at 9 o'clock. When we come back, we'll give Lois an opportunity. She's been itching to ask some questions herself. We'll give Lois an opportunity to ask her questions, and then we go to what next from here. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are now in the final minutes of this conversation, and our farmer here, Lois, has had quite, has followed the discussions very keenly, and she would like an opportunity to ask some questions to the panelists. Lois?
Oh, thank you very much. My question goes to the Daktari.
Hold your mic closer to your mouth.
Daktari, my question is this. I'm here on behalf of Oldili dairy farmers, and I'm glad to inform this panel that we have little knowledge we gained from SNV, who taught us how to grow various types of grass, and they even donated the seeds. And last rainy season, that's April to May, we planted those seeds, but there was not enough rain, so the seed all died. Now, they are also preparing us to plant more seeds and even putting them necessary. Tomorrow, they are there to teach us how to grow them on seedling. So my question is this. If we grow these seeds or the fodders, and we don't have the know-how to put up the mabati shade to store the fodder, who will come to our help, especially we women? Because, you know, our men, when there is drought, they have all that power to move their cattle even to Mombasa. But the ladies are left home with their children and no milk, no cow to, they don't even leave one cow to milk for the young children. And because we have a very big land, now the Maasai ladies, especially those from the cooperative, they own a small land, maybe 1 acre or 2 acres, which has been allocated to them by their husbands to grow the seeds or the grass. The main problem is how to save them or to save the hay and the silage. The most shortage or the problem is the funds, because the women don't have title deed to go to bank and get the loan.
Yes, yes.
We don't have that. You are given a lumber, your husband, but not the title deed. And if you go to bank, they need the security. The security is the title. So, how can the Ministry of Livestock and also the bank come to help the ladies? Especially this time now we are expecting good rains. At least to restock one dairy cow. And at least to build a small shade where we can restore the fodders. Because as the banker said, how can they bring the hay within the 2 areas, 2 weeks time, so we can buy them and restore for our cattle. That is not a problem. The problem is the pocket. There's no money. The ladies don't have money. But if there is other terms, good terms on how we can be funded to put up the stock, we are ready. We are ready to change. And also I'm appealing to Maasai community, to our men, the younger and the older one. Please, the last drought has taught us a very great lesson. It is our time now to change. Whether we like it or not, we don't have to keep all those cows, 300 cows, and you continue feeding them and they are dying every day, you are left with nothing. It is just like a child going to school to class 8 and then she come back to start nursery. We will never progress. So we better change our lifestyle, our mindset. If the Nino come, the little animals we have, when there is a danger that there's no any other rain, we sell. I appeal to the community. Don't just wait all your cattle to die and then we start crying again.
You know, Lois, I was actually going to ask you if you think destocking and reducing the number of livestock could be seen as a solution. And I'm glad you brought it up yourself. But now I'd like you to give them an opportunity to respond to your question. Dr. Wanga, you could go first.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Lois' concern is very, very genuine. What I want to encourage Lois and other lady viewers, the banks today have become more modern, and the cooperative societies are even better. Not to mention the Hustler Fund. You see, the character loans are now in full force. Table banking, you can self-guarantee, so the issue of title deed for small loans now no longer arises. So I want to encourage women will qualify a lot for the character loans. If you can focus on those character loans where you co-guarantee each other, you don't need a collateral, then to me this is going to be an easier, quicker solution in terms of accessing funds, because livestock, we are slowly convincing the banking institutions that it has intrinsic value. You don't have to look at it as a risky venture. And as that goes on, I think we cannot lose the opportunity of the strength of our women, especially in the pastoralist areas. So I want to encourage you, and for the sake of our farmers, I also want to appeal to the county governments, please. 90% of this country is a farming country. And it will be key that we have extension officers to be able to be available to help our farmers in terms of advising how best do they do their seed. And irrigation does not have to be huge equipment. Lois and the other farmers, rain harvesting, water storage is key, so that when you're given seed, when you plant seed and for a reason or the other, drought sets in and you have stored water through whichever means appropriate for your area, you'll be able to still have the seed germinate, and the advice you'll be given by our frontline staff should be able to help you. So here, I want to urge our frontline staff, our extension officers, that please calm down, let's help our farmers, because the technology of even growing serious crops exists. That's why Israel has fruits, Israel has livestock, and Israel is a bigger desert than this country. So for me, it's for us to ensure that our extension officers are able to help the farmers, like Lois, to make best use of their land, be it 1 acre, half an acre, because the technology is in place. So Lois, don't give up. I want to encourage you. Go right ahead. If you have no collateral, go for character loans. You'll still be able to do the little that you targeted to do.
Okay, Mr. Masharia, are you convinced that livestock sector is not a risky venture?
Yes, definitely. I am convinced. And let me say this. Majority of all of the most successful small and medium scale farms are actually run by women. When I hear Lois pleading for the, on behalf of women to be supported to be able to save their livestock, I really feel that actually this is something that is really overdue. And important to note is that we acknowledge as financial institutions that women do not necessarily own properties, but they are the ones who actually take care of the properties because they are always present at home. And when you help them or support them from with finance or financial services that are able to to bring the businesses to stability, then we know very well that those farms will always succeed in the long haul. But of the importance, I think the behavior of borrowers is what actually helps banks to make a decision in terms of how and what level of support we can be able to give them. And going by the story that Lois has given about her cooperative, it means that she has membership that is actually committed, and I'm sure this is replicated across board, not just in her own cooperative. And when we go and see the kind of work that they have done in the past, we use that as the basis of supporting women. The way Dr. Wanga is saying is actually real, that when they come together, we use what we call social guarantee to support women. But most importantly, even when they are individual farmers who are not necessarily attached to this women group or cooperatives, they can be able to access their own individual limits from the banks and be able to actually buy whatever is required for purposes of stocking. We have recently, for example, if I could give just an example, partnered with some fodder traders within the bank, and we have agreed that during this window between this month and the kicking in of or off of the El Nino, we will support anybody who is keen to stock up, because we know if we help them to stock up, they will not lose the livestock. But also importantly, the product that they have been selling, which is coming out of the livestock, will actually be saved, and their incomes will always will obviously be saved.
So you and Lois need to have a chat after.
Definitely, yes, yes.
Okay,
yes.
so we are just wrapping up. So I'd like all of you now to get to your final thoughts. So David, I would like to start with you. Just in about less than a minute, what do you want us to remember?
Yeah, I think our fodder situation is not only a problem. It may be seen as a problem on the face value, but I think it's also an opportunity. At the region, we lost over 9 million cattle. Now, that would have required about 10 million acres of land to be cultivated for those cows for this cattle to have been saved. So, just imagine an enterprise of 10 million acres of fodder. How many people employed? How many banks lending? How much insurance covering, underwriting that? It's a huge opportunity. And for Kenya, 2.5 million cattle that we lost in the last drought. In 4 seasons of less rain, we lost 2.5 million. If you look at the value of what we lost at the regional level, that was more than what Uganda exports in coffee, and is the second largest exporter of coffee in Africa. If you look at Kenya, 2.5 million lost in cattle. In 4 seasons, it's equivalent to what supports 2 counties in a year. That's a budget for 2 counties. 12.5 billion shillings that was lost. We could have required less than 1 million acres to cultivate fodder and support those cattle would have existed, would have continued living if we had that kind of investment. Now imagine that if it was supposed to be supported by a bank, investors, insurance, employment, nutrition. It's a huge opportunity, and I'm inviting anyone who could see this as an opportunity, because it's not only a problem, it's a big opportunity for many actors in the supply chain of fodder. Thank you.
Dr. Wanga, in a minute, what do you want us to remember?
The future is livestock. If we utilize the focus under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, within the livestock space, we have the dairy industry, where we're looking at doubling our production, moving our exports up to 1 billion liters of milk. We look at the leather industry, mopping up all the 18 million skins, 3 million hides and skins, and transforming all that into leather. And this would transform into a multi-million export in Kamana. We are looking at doubling the meat supply from our livestock. So this is an area of investment, and as I spoke to earlier, a roadmap to this, focusing on each and every value chain. We are working on a livestock master plan that is going to inform all investors within the livestock space to be able to make targeted investments in whichever value chain based on available and accurate information for you to have return on investment. And maybe the banks now will be able to put their more money on us, because we'll be much more predictable as we hope to have mitigated risks. And for the farmers, livestock farmers, please, you have sufficient professionals. Make use of them. We have enough veterinarians, we have enough animal production. Make use of these people so that we are able to transform the livestock sector to what should give us money in our pockets, food, and all we aspire from this very, very critical sector. Thank you.
Paul, your final thoughts?
Animal feed and feeding accounts for 70% of the cost of livestock production. The data given should not be a worrying trend for the countries. There are opportunities in the feed sector for people like Lois and younger people to be involved in the feed sector. And the sector has a potential to even employ more people so that we can produce clean, safe, and better livestock. And there is hope for this region. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is there. Kenya is party to it, Uganda, all our countries. So there's hope there. Let's just invest in this potential that we have, and then let the feed sector also serve its purpose in building the economy of the countries.
Yes. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. So we need to say our goodbyes and then get into the bulletin. I'd like to thank all of you for making time to be in this discussion. I know Lois still has a couple of questions to ask each of you. She'll ask you privately. Thank you for joining us on NTV Kenya and at NTV Uganda. You can still keep this conversation going at Zaino and Dati. I'm sure you can also tag the AU your questions, and they'll be able to answer what this means for you. My name is Zena Bondati. NTV Tonight is coming right up with Olive Barrows. Do not go away.